Some evenings, when the crickets start fiddling out back and the kettle sings its sleepy tune, a certain smell drifts through my mind. Warm cinnamon bread, the kind my mama used to pull from the oven on Wednesdays, and that scent is all it takes to open the oldest door in my heart. I'm Annie Mae Foster, though most folks just call me Miss Annie, and tonight that bread and butter memory won't quit tapping on my shoulder. It carries me straight back to a rain-slicked April morning in 1992 when I stepped onto a neat little porch in Brookside, Ohio, to interview for a nanny job that, truth be told, was really my last chance at holding body and soul together. Now, before I wander too far down memory lane, oh sweetheart, if you've got a moment, would you mind tapping that tiny thumbs up and maybe leaving a kind word? An old gal like me surely does cherish the company. Thank you, darling. Anyhow, I reckon I'm sitting here tonight because the ghost of that porch bell keeps ringing in my ears. 30+ years have passed, yet the click of its brass button still sets my pulse to running, 'cause on the other side of that door was a 12-year-old girl with hazel eyes just like my mama's and a laugh that sounded mighty familiar. Too familiar. See, I'd once signed a paper in a far-off city under fluorescent lights that buzzed like locusts, promising I'd never claim a newborn wrapped in hospital cotton. I was only 17 then, the pastor's wayward daughter, bearing more shame than skin. Folks said the good Lord forgives, but back in 1980, our town didn't cotton to mistakes, and my parents shipped me off so the congregation wouldn't see my belly grow. I delivered my baby, kissed her damp forehead exactly once, and was told to forget. Yet memory is a stubborn weed. You can mow it down, dear, but the roots hang on. So there I was in 92, fresh from a lousy marriage and flat broke, knocking for work at a tidy clapboard house, and when the door opened, mercy, I felt every breath I'd ever taken hitch inside my chest. The lady of the house handed me a stack of references, but I barely heard her, 'cause the girl behind her, that bright-eyed child clutching a library book, carried my dimple on her left cheek. She glanced up, grinned, and something inside me sat bolt upright, wide awake after a 12-year nap. I ought to have turned heel right then, but I didn't. Couldn't. Maybe Providence was giving me a second shot at standing guard over the life I once surrendered. Ever since, the memory of that first meeting has lived under my ribs like a small bird, fluttering every time the wind shifts. And tonight, for reasons I can't rightly name, maybe it's the rain tapping the roof just so, maybe it's the empty house after supper, I feel that flutter stronger than usual. I've carried this hush-hush tale close for decades, stitched into my days like the hem of a Sunday dress, and though I'll never breathe the truth aloud to her, my bones ache with the need to unburden someplace. So I'm pouring it out here on this porch, talking straight to you through the glow of a screen, hoping the night air might lighten once the words are loose. Stay with me, won't you? Because before this story's done, you'll hear how a forgotten lullaby circled back around, how a single telephone call cracked the silence, and how a secret can love you and haunt you in the same slow heartbeat. Tell me, friend, have you ever held a truth so tender you feared even daylight might bruise it? Back when the world still smelled of fresh-cut hay and Sunday school paste, I was Annie Mae Cooper, skinny as a sapling, knees forever grass-stained, and certain the horizon began and ended at the cornfields hugging Brookside, Ohio. Daddy rang the church bell at sunrise and tucked his collar tight like it was armor, while Mama hummed Blessed Assurance over biscuit dough that rose soft as clouds in a chipped blue bowl. Summers moved slow, stitched together by cicada songs, VBS banners flapping in hot wind, and potluck tables groaning under jello molds that shivered whenever someone said grace too loud. The ladies' circle called me preacher's girl, and I reckon I leaned into that halo, polishing it with good grades and yes ma'am smiles, even when the boys behind the bleachers teased me for carrying a dog-eared Bible in my gym bag. On Friday nights, we packed into Falcon Stadium, peppermint sticks melting in our palms, while the marching band spelled out BROOKSIDE under harvest moonlight. I'd sit with my best friend Clara Jean, sharing a quilt we crocheted during one dull civics class, and daydream about leaving town to study art. Paris, maybe Chicago if Paris felt too big, but I never told Daddy that part. He said a girl's gifts belong to the Lord first and her family second. College was fine, so long as it led straight back home. Still, I filled notebooks with sketches of wide avenues and people who spoke quick French, believing kindness was a passport all its own, and that good folks, like pigeons in the square, always circled back to the hand that fed them. Evenings, fireflies stitched neon freckles in the dark, and I'd lie on the hood of Daddy's Buick counting satellites, promising the sky I'd visit every sparkling place it pointed out. 1, 2, maybe 100. I kept those promises folded like secret letters beneath my pillow, and when Mama switched off the lamp, she'd kiss my forehead and whisper, "He who watches over you will never slumber," which sounded mighty comforting until I turned 16 and realized some eyes in this world close real quick when trouble shows. But before trouble, life was a tapestry of church bake sales, 4-H ribbons, and the sweet ache of first snow mornings when we scraped frost flowers off the inside of our bedroom window. I believed adults had answers tucked neat in their breast pockets, that prayers traveled faster than telephone wires, and that mercy was as common as milkweed drifting across county roads. I believed a girl's heart could stretch forever and never tear. Most of all, I believed in return. Return of swallow to barn beam, of father from long workday, of future self to front porch rocker with no regrets tucked under her quilt. Funny how faith like that glows brightest right before the wind comes and snuffs it out. Looking back, I see that younger Annie standing barefoot on the parsonage steps, hair smelling of lilac, hands sticky with summer peaches, and I want to cup her face and say, "Honey, hold tight to your dreams. The road ahead's gonna shake 'em something fierce." But she wouldn't understand. She only knew crickets and hymnals and the untested sweetness of a world where every kindness boomerangs home. And so she kept believing, even as September crept close with its whisper of locker slams and homecoming mums, believing right up until the night a county fair Ferris wheel lifted her higher than she'd ever been, and a laughing boy with reckless eyes leaned in, tipping her universe off its tidy axis, setting in motion the great hush no hymn could cover. Yet before that spin, before the hush, there was nothing but small town rhythm and the steady hum of hope, as steady as Mama's singer sewing machine, stitching Sunday dresses, as steady as Daddy's deep Amen, and I, Lord help me, thought the stitch of goodness would hold forever. It happened one steamy August evening, the kind when cicadas shriek like they're trying to stitch the sky back together and the air tastes of cotton candy and kettle corn. Brookside's summer jubilee had rolled into town, bright bulbs winking over rust-flecked rides, and Daddy, busy greeting parishioners near the bingo tent, gave me $2 crisp and strict instructions to stay with Clara Jean. But Clara lingered by the ring-toss booth, moon-eyed over Bobby Dalton, so I wandered toward the Ferris wheel alone, following the sweet, tinny calliope music that floated above everything like a promise. That's when I saw him. Matthew Matty Rhodes, 22, home from trade school, leaning against the prize counter with a worn leather jacket slung over one shoulder, even though it was 88 in the shade. His hair curled at the nape the way boys in teen magazines wore it. And when our eyes met, I felt something hitch inside my chest, like a bee trapped under a mason jar. He grinned, easy and crooked, and tipped an invisible hat. I glanced left, right, nowhere to hide the blush singing up my cheeks, so I smoothed my skirt and pretended to study the neon-painted sign. 2 riders, 1 ticket. Matty stepped closer, smelling of spearmint gum and gasoline, and drawled, "Looks like you could use a partner, darlin'. Wheel's more fun with company." I opened my mouth to decline. Daddy's rules drummed steady in my ears, but the midway lights glimmered off his eyes, turning them lake water blue, and that jarred bee inside me began beating its wings. Next thing I knew, we were climbing into a metal gondola, the carney latching the bar with a clang that echoed clear to the Methodist bake sale. As the wheel groaned upward, Brookside shrank beneath our dangling feet. Church steeple, water tower, grid of sleepy streets, until it all looked like one of my pencil sketches, small enough to fold into an envelope. Wind tangled my hair, and Maddie laughed low, a sound rough at the edges but warm as campfire embers. Halfway up, he pointed toward the horizon, where the sun bled orange behind the soybean fields, and said, "Ever wonder what's past that line?" I nodded, heart drumming so loud I feared he could hear. "All the time," I whispered, surprised to find the words tasting true. He told me he wanted to build engines for race cars, travel the circuit, see California. I told him about Paris sketches I kept under my mattress. He whistled and said a girl with dreams that big shouldn't stay pinned in like a fairground pony. Mercy, I swear the twilight shimmered then, as if the whole county held its breath for us. At the top, the wheel paused, just a hiccup in the machinery. But in that hush, Maddie reached over, brushed a stray lock from my cheek, and my pulse leapt so sudden I near lost my voice. In that single touch, every hymn I'd ever sung blurred with the carnival music below until I couldn't tell church bells from calliope pipes. When the wheel finally lurched forward, my hand stayed in his without thought, like two puzzle pieces that didn't know they'd been missing each other. I didn't register Daddy's distant voice or Clara Jean calling my name. The only sound was the rush of future possibilities crackling between us. By the time we reached the ground, dusk had settled violet over the fair, and Maddie asked if I'd like a lemonade. I almost said no. Good sense still tugged my sleeve, but something new and bright bubbled up, whispering, "Say yes, just once." So I did. We sat on a hay bale, sipping tart sweetness, fireflies blinking approval, and he talked about engines while I sketched dreams in the dust with my shoe tip. I couldn't explain then why my heart beat quicker whenever his shoulder brushed mine. I only knew the fair glow painted everything golden, and kindness felt suddenly wider than Brookside, wide enough to sweep me clear off my careful road map. That night, walking home under street lamps buzzing with moths, I clutched the Ferris wheel ticket stub in my palm like a secret vow, unaware that one sugar-spun evening had nudged my tidy life onto a track I couldn't yet see, one leading straight to a cold hospital corridor, a signed paper, and a lullaby I'd carry in silence for decades. But in that moment, all I felt was wind-burned wonder and a brand new heartbeat galloping toward the unknown. I wish I could tell you that summer glow lasted, honey, but not 3 moons after the Jubilee, my calendar skipped a page of its own accord, and the minute hand on every clock in Brookside seemed to start ticking loud enough to rattle the church windows. I blamed the heat, chalked the queasy mornings up to Clara Jean's roadside lemonade, wrapped myself in Daddy's old letter jacket to hide the thickening at my waist. But a body knows its secrets even when the mind tries to hush them. One drizzly Friday, I fetched communion linens from the sacristy and almost fainted at the scent of wine. Sister Ruth caught me, patted my cheek and whispered, "Child, you're white as Easter lilies." That kindness splintered me worse than scorn. I ran home, locked the bathroom door, pressed both palms to the porcelain sink, and watched a girl I scarcely recognized tremble in the mirror. Eyes too wide, hope too thin. By then, Maddie Rhodes had already vanished, off chasing motor oil dreams downstate, leaving only a smudged phone number and a promise that wandered off with him. When I finally told Clara, her face folded like an origami swan that couldn't hold its shape, yet she hugged me tight and swore she'd stand guard. Trouble was, Brookside didn't keep secrets long. By October, the sweater trick fooled no one. Mama found a receipt for saltines and ginger tea in my dresser and pieced it together faster than a patchwork square. She cried without sound, fingertips searching the beads of her rosary the way a blind woman reads Braille. And then Daddy, oh Lord. Daddy's disappointment filled the hallway like smoke. He didn't shout. The silence was worse, a cold front settling over supper that turned every fork scrape into thunder. 2 days later, he called in a favor with an old seminary friend in Columbus and announced I'd be living with cousin Eloise until things were decently resolved. Resolved meant hidden, hush-hush, out of sight of the congregation that had clipped recipes from Mama's newsletter just last month. The night before I left, I sat on the back steps listening to the November wind comb through corn stubble, wondering how hope could bruise so many colors at once. Part of me wanted to stomp my foot, declare the child inside me was no stain but a miracle. Another part shrank like a marigold in frost, desperate for someone older, braver, to step in and say everything would be all right. No such guardian arrived, so I packed my sketchbook beside a jar of peach preserves. Mama slipped into my suitcase and climbed into Daddy's Ford at dawn. He kept both hands glued to the steering wheel, knuckles pale, gospel station murmuring low, and every mile marker felt like a tally of sins. In Columbus, the home for wayward girls sat behind iron gates, red brick walls draped in withered ivy. Matrons in gray uniforms greeted us with tight smiles, praising Daddy for his difficult but righteous decision, and I swore my heart turned to sand right then, sifting grain by grain into my shoes. Nights there smelled of disinfectant and unsaid prayers. Girls cried into pillows while teachers read proverbs aloud like lullabies that never quite settled the dark. I wrote Clara letters I couldn't mail and sketched Parisian rooftops until the charcoal nubs snapped. Yet between fear and shame, something small and bright flickered. Each flutter in my belly felt like the world's gentlest knock, asking permission to exist. That secret knock kept me breathing when the doctor confirmed February due date, when Daddy's Christmas card arrived signed only with his title, and when Maddie's number rang dead. The dilemma tightened around me like that hospital gown I'd one day wear. Love the child and betray my family, or obey and pretend my arms never ached for what they'd soon lose. Even now, dear, the memory of that choice sits heavy as a lead thimble in my sewing basket, because in Columbus I learned a hard truth. Sometimes goodness isn't a boomerang at all. Sometimes it leaves your hand and never circles back, and you're left praying the empty sky will send something, anything, gentle in return. Time froze the instant the elevator door slid open onto the maternity floor, fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead like judgmental hornets, floor wax sharp in my nose, February snow slanting blue against the window at the far end of the corridor, and I swear I felt the second hand on the big wall clock hitch, as though it too held its breath. They wheeled me past rows of pink and blue swaddles toward delivery room 3, Mama stalking beside the gurney, jaw set so tight the bones fluttered beneath her skin. Daddy 3 paces back reciting psalms under his breath as if scripture could white out consequence. Labor came like a coastal storm, first distant and curious, then crashing saltwater against brittle docks, and in each crest of pain, I heard Maddie's laugh fading down some road I could no longer find. For 12 hours the world narrowed to heartbeat blips and the sterile stink of latex, until at 3:17 a.m., the doctor announced one last push, and a cry, thin, startled, human, split the silence so clean it rang like crystal. They lifted her, slick and squalling, into my trembling arms, and for 5 miraculous seconds, everything I'd ever feared fell quiet. Her fingers, tiny as dandelion stems, curled around my knuckle with a strength that felt ancient, and I memorized the curve of her ear, the downy swirl at her crown, the dimple just beginning to bloom in her cheek. Then the door creaked, and the matron from the home entered holding a clipboard. eyes soft in apology, yet unyielding. And Mama touched my shoulder, whispering, "Annie Mae, do right by the life God's given you," though her gaze fixed on the linoleum, not the child. I knew what came next. The paper already bore my typed name, blank lines waiting for ink to sever us. But when the nurse tried to lift my baby away, I clutched harder, a low moan shaking loose from somewhere older than language. Daddy stepped forward then, voice flat as winter fields. "It's time." In that moment, I understood ruin, how it isn't always thunder and rubble. Sometimes it's daylight on a white wall while you hand your heartbeat to strangers. My arms obeyed even as my soul rebelled. The nurse carried her to the warmer, and the air inside me collapsed like a barn roof under snow. I sat propped against starched pillows while the matron guided my hand to the pen. Ink bled across the signature line, each letter a funeral bell, and when I dotted the I, my milk let down in hot betrayal, proof my body still believed what my mind had signed away. The clock ticked again, time lurching back into motion, and the matron murmured, "Brave girl," but the words slid off me like water on glass. They dressed my daughter in a lemon cream sleeper, fastened a tag that read, "Baby girl adoption pending," and for a heartbeat the room spun so violently I feared I'd faint, yet its cruelty stayed crystal clear. I would leave that hospital lighter by 7 pounds 14 ounces and heavier by a hollow no prayer could fill. When Mama kissed my forehead, her lips were cool, but tears slicked her cheeks. She whispered that someday I'd thank her, though the apology in her eyes said she doubted it herself. As they wheeled me out, I craned my neck for one last look. The nursery lights reflected in the glass, turning every bassinet into a mirage, and I couldn't tell which bundle was mine. That was the fracture, the precise instant my world split like porcelain, because in losing her face I lost my own, stepping into a lifetime where love would live underground, silent yet unextinguished, waiting for a borrowed laugh 12 years later to call it back to the surface. The years that followed moved slow as molasses in January, yet every dawn seemed to carry me a mile farther from the girl who'd once sketched Paris rooftops on notebook margins. I finished out senior year under Cousin Eloise's watch, walking the hallways like a pale ghost who kept her eyes on locker hinges instead of faces, and when the cap and gown applause finally washed over the gym, I felt it slide right off, leaving no mark at all. Folks in Brookside said time heals, but back then time felt more like a quiet house after company's gone. Chairs still warm, yet the echo of laughter fading, plates stacked, nothing left but the hum of the refrigerator and a tired clock clicking away at its own heartbeat. I worked mornings at Hammond's Dry Goods, smiled on cue, folded gingham bolts while my mind replayed a 5-second reel of lemon cream sleeper and dimpled cheek. Nights I'd sit by the upstairs window, tracing frost grains and asking the dark where my baby girl lay her head. Did someone hum to her the way I did inside my ribs? Prayer used to roll off my tongue easy as creek water, but after that February, my conversations with heaven grew halting, like a phone line with too much static. I still bowed my head in church, yet the words tasted thin, and every time Daddy looked my way, I saw both love and regret camped in his eyes, tents pitched too close to ever dismantle. By 21, I married Howard Foster because he was kind and steady and said I didn't have to pretend sunshine if I wasn't feeling it. He'd hold my hand, call me his June bride, and for a spell, I believed maybe sorrow could be quilted over. But the first time I miscarried, 7 weeks along, tiny hope that fizzled before it even found a heartbeat, I realized loss breeds its own echo. You can bury one grief, yet its root hair clings to the next seed life offers. Howard tried, bless him, but my nights were stitched with lullabies I never sang aloud, and the silence between us widened like a river that refused any bridge. 4 years in, he met a younger woman at the transmission shop, someone who laughed light and didn't carry storm clouds in her purse. And one April afternoon, he packed his suitcase, set my favorite mug on the kitchen counter so it wouldn't break in the shuffle, and left a note that read, "I pray you find peace." I didn't slam doors or cry much, just stood at the screen porch watching his taillights fade, feeling strangely hollowed, as though heartache had scooped me clean, and the wind now whistled straight through. Even the town itself had shifted. Storefronts painted over, new families filling pews, my childhood friends busy chasing toddlers that carried their dimples. I'd smile at their baby pictures, offer polite, "How sweet," then hurry home to sit on the back step, palms open on my lap, wondering how many invisible children a woman can cradle before her arms get too tired. Yet somewhere inside that hush, a thin thread of resolve began to weave. If I could not mother the child who came from my own body, perhaps I could mother the world in small pockets, bandaging skinned knees at vacation Bible school, baking cinnamon bread for shut-ins, humming the secret lullaby to neighbor kids when thunderstorms cracked wide. Little by little, I let those tasks stitch me into the fabric of ordinary days, until the ache softened from outright howl to low hum, the sort a person can carry while still noticing sunsets. I wasn't healed, not in the glossy magazine sense, but I learned to live like a house with one window boarded. Plenty of light still sneaks in if you keep the remaining panes clean. And so, by the time 1992 rolled around and life's peculiar wind blew me back to Brookside penniless yet upright, I was a woman patched with silence, simpler dreams, and one lullaby folded neat in her pocket, ready, though she didn't know it, to meet the echo her own heart had never stopped calling. I'd been back in Brookside barely 2 weeks, sleeping on Clara Jean's fold-out sofa, counting the change in a mason jar for gas money, when the Lord, or maybe just plain chance, tapped a gentle knuckle on the door of my wearied spirit. It was a Tuesday, gray and drizzly the way early March likes to be in Ohio. Clara was frying scrapple for her boys before school when the telephone jangled. She answered, then pressed the receiver to her chest and mouthed, "Need a nanny, nice family on Sycamore Lane, good pay." The words fluttered around my ribs like a sparrow too long caged. I hadn't looked after children since vacation Bible school, yet something warm uncurled inside me at the thought of packing lunches and tying shoelaces. So I ironed my best blouse, the one with pearl buttons still hanging on, and borrowed Clara's umbrella that smelled faintly of lilacs, and I drove her old Pontiac through puddles that shivered with streetlight reflections. The house on Sycamore stood prim as a hymn book, shutters trimmed robin egg blue, daffodils poking brave heads through leftover snow. I paused on the porch, smoothed my skirt, whispered, "Give me grace," then rang the bell. A woman with tidy curls opened the door, "Mrs. Fletcher," and led me down a hallway filled with framed vacations, mountains, Disney castles, Christmas sweaters. She spoke of schedules, homework, piano practice. I nodded, polite, but my gaze kept drifting toward the living room doorway where a 12-year-old girl sat cross-legged on the rug, tracing a maze in one of those highlights magazines. Her hair was the shade of sun-baked wheat. A single dimple deepened when she bit her lip in concentration. And mercy, when she glanced up, her hazel eyes caught mine, and something ancient sparked behind my ribs, a match striking after years of damp. I must have stared longer than was proper, because the child's mouth tilted curious, half smile, half question, and before I could school my face, she laughed. Quick, bright, echoing off the hardwood exactly like the bell-clear peal I'd once heard in a delivery room at 3:17 a.m. My knees went weak. I gripped my purse handle so hard the vinyl squeaked. "Mrs. Fletcher asked if I had experience administering children's medicine." My tongue felt thick, but I managed, "Yes, ma'am," though what I meant was, I once memorized the rhythm of this very laugh before I'd even seen daylight. The interview wrapped in a fog of heartbeats. I think I spoke of first aid cards and library story time, yet all the while I was tracing invisible freckles on a newborn cheek I hadn't held in 13 years. At the door, Mrs. Fletcher smiled, said they'd call after supper, but the girl piped up, "Mom, I like her. She smells like cinnamon." Cinnamon, same spice I'd mixed into bread dough the night labor started. My breath caught so sharp I feared it would whistle. Mrs. Fletcher laughed, ruffled her daughter's hair, then turned back to me. "Can you start Monday?" Driving away, windshield wipers metronoming, I let a single tear slip. Not sorrow this time, but something gentler. Hope wearing house shoes, padding soft across my soul. The road beyond my headlights was still dark, but there in the gleam sat a new purpose. Maybe I couldn't rewrite the past, but I could lace up its shoes each morning, pack it apple slices, walk it to the bus stop, and guard it from storm clouds. That night, Clara poured 2 mugs of chamomile, and I told her I'd gotten the job. She squeezed my hand, winked, and said, "Looks like the good Lord finally circled back." I went to sleep hearing the girls' laugh echo through the hollows of my spirit, filling chambers I thought were sealed for good, and I woke before dawn humming the lullaby I'd sworn never to sing again. Soft, shy, but alive, like a crocus daring its first bloom through crusted frost. The spring Lydia turned 18, college brochures fanned out like bright feathers on the kitchen table, and Mrs. Fletcher fretting over tuition forms. I climbed to the attic one rainy Saturday to hunt for her old softball glove and ended up kneeling beside a trunk I'd lugged from Columbus 3 decades back, the one I'd sworn never to open again. Dust rose in lazy motes as I lifted the lid, and there, wrapped in yellow tissue, lay the lemon cream sleeper the nurse had let me keep out of sympathy, along with the discharge papers whose black and white signature still looked like it belonged to some other girl. I sat cross-legged on the planks, thunder bumping the rafters, and for the first time since that night, I read every brittle word: relinquish, adoptive, irrevocable. My throat hitched and tears slid free, warm as bathwater. Yet as they fell, I felt something shift, an old iron latch inside me lifting off its hinges. All these years, I'd carried 2 lives in one set of bones: the nanny who packed lunches and braided hair, and the mother who hummed lullabies into pantry shadows. The strain of holding them apart had bent me quiet, but kneeling there, I realized the pieces weren't enemies after all. They were patchwork squares of the same worn quilt, and I, Honey, was the only one still stitching. So I unfolded that tiny sleeper, pressed it to my cheek, breathed in the faint ghost of dreft and newborn scalp. Then, hands trembling but steady and intent, I walked downstairs, fetched the tin box where I kept Papa's fishing lures, and slipped the papers inside. I carried the tin to the backyard, where Lydia and I once planted a cherry tree from a 2nd grade science project, its trunk now thick enough to shoulder my sorrow. The rain had eased to a mist, worms surfacing, robins hopping bold. I knelt at the roots, scooped a hole with Mama's old pie server, and buried the box deep, patting soil until my palms shone slick and honest. "There," I whispered, raindrops mingling with tears. "You rest now. Hush." In that moment, I chose the road still stretching in front of me, rather than the one that keeps folding back on itself like a question with no answer. I chose to love Lydia with the full, fierce measure of a mother's heart, yet free her from the weight of explanation she never asked to carry. I chose to forgive Daddy for silence, Mama for fear, Maddie for absence, and the trembling girl I used to be for simply trying to survive the storm. Walking back to the house, wet skirt clinging, I felt lighter than peeled paint, as though heaven itself had opened a window and let breeze sweep the stale rooms of my soul. I brewed chamomile and sat in the rocker by the window, listening to Lydia's laugh drift upstairs while she video chatted friends about dorm decor. And instead of pain, a sweet ache settled, a knowing that my love had grown her strong, even if she called it by another name. I exhaled long, like you do after kneeling in prayer, and the edges of the world softened. Outside, the cherry tree shook off droplets, blossoms pink as new promise, and I heard myself murmur, I can live forward now. No pretenses, no regrets, just forward. And so I did. I framed new photographs, volunteered at the library, learned to play dominoes on Wednesday nights, and whenever the lullaby rose in my throat, I sang it full voice, no hiding, letting its notes float through open windows for anyone, everyone, perhaps even Lydia, to hear, because the past had happened. Yes, but mercy, child. It no longer owned the deed to my tomorrow. Funny thing about time, sweetheart. It has a way of teaching lessons even when you're too busy mending socks to notice the chalkboard. I spent half my life convinced goodness was a boomerang that always curved back if you held your breath long enough, and the other half convinced loss was a stone in your apron pocket you simply learned to walk with. Took me all these years to see neither notion is quite right. Goodness does return. Yes, but seldom in the shape you remember throwing. Loss can weigh heavy, yet every morning you get to choose whether to carry it or set it gently on the porch and let the sunrise warm it a while. When I was that pastor's girl, I measured love by rules and reputations. Now, rocking on this porch with laugh lines deep as creek beds, I measure it by the softness it leaves behind. How a person's presence can settle your spirit like a quilt fresh from the line, even if the label stitched inside reads friend, neighbor, or nanny, instead of the title you once imagined. I've learned secrets grow louder in the dark. Bring them into a sliver of daylight, and they lose half their bite. I've learned forgiveness isn't a grand piano chord, but a series of tiny notes. Brewing chamomile for someone who broke your trust, nodding at a photograph that still stings, humming a lullaby that belonged to a silence. And if you play those notes often enough, one ordinary afternoon you realize the melody sounds like peace. I've learned you can't rewrite the first chapters, yet each dawn hands you a sharpened pencil for the next blank page. Most of all, I've learned waiting for perfect closure is like waiting for a train at a station the line no longer serves. You can grow roots right there on the platform and still never hear a whistle. Maybe, dear listener, you have a ticket in your pocket for such a train, an apology you're owed, a phone call that never came, a dream packed in tissue so long the edges yellowed. If so, let me hand you the wisdom tucked inside these 60-some summers. It might be time to step off that platform, stretch your legs in the sunlight, and start walking toward whatever horizon is humming your name right now. The tracks may pick up farther down, or you may find an altogether different road paved with things you never thought to ask for. Either way, the journey beats counting hours in a place hope forgot. Life will still bruise you, child. Storm clouds don't stop just because you've weathered one. But I promise the same sky that thunders also remembers how to pour gold at dusk, and both sights are worth keeping your eyes open for. So here's what I know. Carved clear as scripture in the grain of this old rocking chair. Love that stays quiet is still love. Broken beginnings can grow sturdy branches, and mercy, like wildflowers, takes root in the unlikeliest cracks. If my story offers any sort of lantern, let it be this bright thought. You are allowed to outgrow the grief that once felt like skin, allowed to lay it down without ceremony, and allowed, this very evening, to choose a lighter garment for your heart. Maybe, just maybe, it's your turn to stop waiting for the echo of a door that closed years ago and start listening for new footsteps on your porch. Tell me, friend, what are you still holding that no longer fits the shape of your days? The porch light is flickering now, the way it does when the moths crowd too close, and I can feel the night pressing gentle fingers against my eyelids, yet my heart is wide awake and leaning forward, toward you. After all our miles together this evening, I hope you'll allow an old gal one more rocking chair confession. Every story I've spoken, every laugh and tear I set loose into the soft blue glow of this screen was never meant to circle back to me. It was meant to land, featherlight, in whatever quiet corner of your own memory is ready to be stirred. I reckon that's the finest purpose a tale can serve, to slip between the cracks of someone else's day and remind them they aren't walking their road alone. I still hear Lydia's voice sometimes, bright as wind chimes through an open window, asking if that lullaby came from a dream I once had. And when I answer, the line goes still, not heavy, not broken, just still, like the hush of a lake that has decided for a single sacred moment to mirror the stars instead of the moon. In that hush, I sense she knows more than either of us will ever lay plain, and maybe that knowing is enough. Maybe true love doesn't have to shout its name to be true. Maybe it just keeps showing up, packing sandwiches, holding umbrellas, humming old tunes, until its presence feels as natural as breathing. And so I send this story out to you, stranger friend, with the same quiet faith that somewhere inside your day, there's a tender corner waiting to be named and a gentle courage awakening, ready at last to pick up the pen and begin a brand new sentence. Because if my half-century of sunrises has taught me anything, it's that endings are rarely full stops. More often, they're commas inviting us to lean in closer and whisper, "What comes next?" So tell me, if you've got a mind to share, do you believe real love is duty-bound to find its way home? Or is the miracle simply that we learn to love whatever shape it chooses when it returns? I'd be mighty grateful to read your ponderings below. You'd make this porch feel a little less quiet tonight. And if you're carrying a secret of your own, one that thumps like a hidden heartbeat against your ribs, ask yourself whether the hush is keeping you safe or keeping you small. It might be time, sweetheart, to crack a window, let in a sliver of moonlight, and trust that the sky won't fall just because your truth learned how to breathe. As for me, I'll keep the kettle warm and the rocker creaking, listening for Lydia's next call, for the rustle of cherry tree leaves, for the soft footfall of whatever Mercy decides to visit tomorrow. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear that baby's first wail folding into her grown woman laugh, one sound layered inside the other like two hands clasped in prayer, and it gives me a comfort no government paper could ever erase. But that's enough rambling from Miss Annie tonight. I'll leave you with this small dare. Before you flick away to the next video, place your palm over your heart, feel its steady drum, and ask what unfinished song it's still waiting to sing. Then, when morning slips its golden fingers through the curtain, take one brave step toward humming that melody out loud. Who knows, by dusk you might find echoes you never expected answering back. And if they do, well, promise you'll come sit a spell and tell me all about it. Until then, good night, God bless, and may your own porch light burn steady through every far-off thundercloud.